I can only be so conditioned and masked for so long until it gets overwhelming or until I find ways to regulate it. But either way, it's almost like me being neurodivergent is sort of a social karmic consequence of a world that is conditioning itself too much. Hello. Welcome back to my podcast. My name is Ariel, and this is Feeling My Feelings, where I finally feel my feelings after years of dissociating from them, after years of masking them, after years of conditioning myself to believe that I don't have as deep of feelings, as deep of thoughts, as complex of an inner world as I do. And so, y'all, today I'm talking about something that I have been unraveling. My personal experience feeling neurodivergent and how I have dealt with it, how I've tried to heal from trauma over the shame of it, and how I'm embracing myself, my true nature, and what is really kind of to my advantage. So, okay, let's get into it. So I'm going to start this by saying that I recently was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos / hypermobility. And I think a lot of people, especially on TikTok, are now finding out that they have this. Essentially, what it is a developmental issue where you grew up having more joint laxity because you do not produce as much collagen. And so when you have something like that, you likely have other developmental issues, such as general neurodivergence. So that can look like ADHD, that can look like autism, anywhere on that spectrum, and any mix of those things, and maybe other stuff too. So all of this makes sense for me because my experience growing up was that, first of all, my body was way too bendy. But also, I kind of want to say my mind was, in some metaphorical way, but either way, I think when I was younger, I had, well, first of all, a lot of ADHD traits. So I was constantly stimulated and overstimulated. When I was sitting in class when I was younger, I could not focus on the teacher in front of me because I couldn't turn off that someone behind me was constantly fidgeting. I couldn't turn off that someone next to me was like, I don't know, like playing with their paper or shaking their foot or something. Like, I was super hyper aware of the things around me. And when I wasn't like that, I was a little ball of hot mess energy. And I felt the most free when I was like that. But when I tried to contain myself, I felt like I couldn't because there was still so much going on. So it makes sense that I was some sort of ADHD. And also, I felt like I tended towards daydreaming really easily when I was younger. I don't believe that I was super hyperactive and always moving, but I think that sort of hot mess of an energy was that my mind wanted to be this little creative, like head in the clouds type of little girl. I was always making up stories. I was always listening to music and getting really excited to think about different scenes I can make that make sense. Like with this song, I wanted to make little music videos. This was always like sort of, well, it was pretty cool. And even when I was younger, like this is where I get into more of an autistic territory. I took to the piano curiously easily. So I was 3 or 4, and even though I didn't practice that much, I learned piano really well by ear. I didn't have to do a lot of practice in order to do well in recitals and competitions, but also when I was trying to do consistent lessons and trying to do consistent practices, I would get easily frustrated. And it would boggle my teacher and my parents' minds because I would always be like, ugh, I didn't get it. Or like, I know that it's this, or I know that I should do it this way. And then I'd practice the day before a recital and I'd get it right. other things with just the way that I learned and the sort of talents and the things that like I gravitated towards. I, in school, really loved both English and math. And also learning Spanish, like learning another language. I loved problem solving when it came to math. I really liked algebra. I also really liked geometry. I liked being able to have complex problem solving. And in addition, I loved writing long essays. I loved analyzing what someone was actually saying when I was reading. And a lot of the times people say that you're either more into English or math. Really loved both. And I really loved learning language because that was also a little sort of puzzle. Anything that was a complex pattern, I really liked being able to string all the all the things together, because my mind would always be more likely to work well on like a macro big picture level. And so that was always a strength of mine, even when I was younger. But in contrast, I hated like multiple choice tests. I hated history and memorizing keywords just because they were correct. And for most people, that's like the easy part. For me, it was so boring to just remember that a word means a thing and to not have to dissect it and have a deeper reason or context for it. It was like my mind always was looking for more stimulation, even in learning. And my mind wants to be extremely active. And so to me, that all makes sense with some sort of neurodivergence. But also, sidebar, what happens if you're just like that? What happens if it's just your personality? Is everyone who's kind of more like on that side of things, big picture side of things, are they all a little bit neurodivergent, or is that just your personality? I have no idea. But anyway, I just felt like I did not want to have just a one-track mind. I did not want to just focus. My mind was made to think of a lot of different ideas and to see how things connected. And as I got older, even right now, I love writing stories. I love basically complex, like psychological problem solving. I love like kind of thinking deeply about, that's why I have this podcast. I love thinking about how people relate to each other and the complex like traumas and sort of psychology. I also do like long-term planning, and I feel like my brain was made for that sort of thing. And again, what I don't like is just learning how to do something correctly because this word equals this word. But also that's a really important skill. That's really important to have in our lives. And we really need good people who are really good at, government, history, all the facts. So good on you guys for that. We all need to be our best version of ourselves. And so round of applause for all of us. But basically what I'm saying is that it was always like underrated that I felt like I had this big picture perspective. I have actually looked into medications. There was a time when I did take Lexapro. There was a time where I talked to a psychiatrist a couple of years ago about ADHD. However, I didn't take a formal test during that time. He had already told me to take Lexapro. I was not very happy with it. I didn't know how to fully get used to it back then. I kept falling asleep at the lowest dose. And so I am still open to taking medications. I am also looking for different alternative, like maybe supplements or something like that to help me with this as I learn more about my neurodivergent nature. But at this time, I have not chosen to take, I guess, more popular medications for it. But I'm looking into it and I'm open to it. Anyway, as I became more aware of my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like literally in the past year or two, I started to realize that it makes sense that by nature I was born this way, baby. I was born this way. And this falls in line with all the ways that I felt my brain and my feelings were different from other people growing up. And so this has all been something that I feel like has really come together, has really made sense in my life. And I feel like overall, no matter where you're at in the neurodivergent spectrum, you did feel different. I did feel different in that I couldn't control myself in the same way that other people did. But now I don't feel so bad about that. And so now we're getting into the masking and conditioning territory. So as I got into my late teens and early 20s, that was the first time in my life where I really learned how to people please and to mask myself. I kept realizing that I had this problem where I couldn't sit in class and sit still, and it was making me uncomfortable. But there still wasn't this realization that it could have been ADHD or anything. I always thought it was just a personality problem, or it was just me. And especially if I grew up with people who did not really recognize or want to recognize really any mental issues, then I always took it as it's a me problem. I have to change myself. And so, like a lot of us, when we get older, I learned to condition myself. But it is definitely different when you are naturally neurodivergent and you're trying to mask yourself. You feel like it's that much more effort to do so. Now, I am really bendy and have posture issues, so I'm already kind of tense and trying to hold myself upright. But there's this extra layer of having to control my overstimulated nature. So in order to control the fact that oh, someone's fidgeting, oh, something's happening behind me, oh my god, it's like I had to lock my body into this tense, don't move, stop being distracted sort of body language. And so I ended up in my body really tense because overall I was trying to control myself. And in addition to that, internally, I was trying to control my feelings. Now, again, I think this happens with most people, but because it's a little bit harder for neurotypical people, and because it's a little bit harder, you kind of learn to do that later in life. I think I usually would have learned how to do this when I was a teen too, but I learned what felt shameful in my early 20s as opposed to more so in my teen years. I felt like I was slow to understand social cues until about my teen years or until about my 20s. And into my 20s, that's when I turned into more of a people pleaser. And into adulthood and into my career life, I learned that I had to completely mask myself. I had to completely overprotect myself. And I kept having this feeling that I knew that I wasn't myself. I knew that I would eventually be myself when I was alone, when I could go back and listen to music, when I could be in my dissociated world. But I never felt and in the most vague general way possible, I didn't feel like I could let my feelings and actual habits and way of thinking fly. I just took on this whole belief that I wasn't allowed to. And without realizing that it had its root in neurodivergence, I just thought I had to change myself. And again, I don't know. I know that this doesn't feel like there's much of a difference in some ways to more neurotypical people, but if you kind of resonate with the more you can't literally control your body or its responses type of thing, that's why this is falling into the deeper neurodivergent spectrum. If it feels like you couldn't turn off your brain and the stimuli around you, I think that's part of it. I feel like even now, in my 30s, I feel like I finally realized that my body had been trying to control itself, trying to control its true nature, trying to control the fact that it really wants to be blunt and not have to put on a mask and conditioning. And it also really wants to move around a lot and be really hyper aware. And it really wants to be, it doesn't know how to not be overstimulated. Socially, y'all, if I was not obviously neurodivergent when it came to school and learning, it had to be obvious socially. Like, growing up in my family, I was just like this little spacey kid that would get easily distracted. I have several photos of myself, like, which I guess my mom kind of gave up on trying to control me after a while, but like, we would be out and about and they would all be smiling for a photo and I'd be like, huh? When it came to social situations, if I felt like there was some sort of danger, which I grew up in a Asian household, so there's going to be a lot of strictness, a lot of inability to understand emotions. There's going to be a lot of over controlling of the emotions. So when I saw those sorts of things happen, I could not contain that it bothered me. There was a lot of, I think for me growing up, it was much harder to mask myself and condition myself like most people, but it was a little harder for me because I think falling on some sort of autistic spectrum and I guess general neurodivergent spectrum, I did not more easily control my emotions until I did. But when I was younger, if I was upset, I felt it very deeply and intensely. I likely had autistic meltdowns, but I was also not an erratic bad kid to my knowledge. Like, I didn't really get in trouble. I was not doing anything wrong. But if something felt wrong to me, I knew it. I knew it in my bones, and I could not make myself believe any different. And there's something about having that lack of ability to train yourself to, I guess, adhere to shame and adhere to social cues feels like it's somewhere on the autism spectrum. And there's something about how normally, if you're a kid and you are being disciplined, you will learn it, and because you just should. And that little bit of still emotional reacting and sort of rebelliousness could be my personality and Aquarius nature, but in addition to that, I just feel like I didn't know how to regulate myself, and I didn't do it as easily as someone who is neurotypical. So yeah, there's that. And then in addition, socially, like, as this kind of got into adolescence and high school, I felt like when something upset me, like, again, if I had to fit in and be socially accepted, I would more easily feel like it was stupid. I'd more easily take myself out of the situation. I'd more easily not care about whether or not I was shamed. And I would more easily just kind of react and be like, this is dumb. I'd be a little bit blunt too. Or I would completely shut down and be quiet and not deal with anyone. Let's say my mom and her mom, they didn't take care of themselves. And so my mom gave birth to a person who had no choice but to learn how to take care of herself. Like, with neurodivergence, with Ehlers-Danlos, these are all turning into what could be potentially more health problems. It's more problems navigating through the world, which is run by neurotypical people. It is more issues with like posture, and posture creates a lot of stomach issues if it's bad. And like, there's all these other things that are unbalanced. So if my mom was unbalanced and didn't take care of herself, she won't have basically a healthy vessel that will birth someone that is healthy enough to take care of themselves either. This is a really, like, I understand, I know that can be, I guess, is blunt the right word? I don't know, like, insensitive, and it's not necessarily correct, like, for everyone. You could be a healthy person and probably still birth someone with a developmental issue. But basically, the point of, like, sort of the spirituality and the deeper meaning of what this means to me is that after generations of people not taking care of themselves, there had to be a natural point. There had to be a natural sort of balance in the universe where one person in the family line finally had to. I had no choice but to be the one that that was born with all these health issues. I had no choice but to be someone who, well, no, I had a choice, but if I really wanted to thrive, if I really wanted to live my best life, I had to choose to look at my health and myself holistically. I had to choose to accept that I was neurodivergent. I had to choose to accept that not everyone knows how to help and treat my physical issues, but some people might. I had to choose to take care of myself over just working hard, over just helping other people. And there's something really interesting, spiritual, and meaningful about the fact that after a long line of people who didn't take care of themselves well, when it finally came to someone who needs to, like, there seemed to be some sort of power and importance to it. Because I feel like it's really interesting that I get to be born into a timeline where I get compassion for this sort of thing. And if I sort of play my cards right, I can't guarantee, obviously, and no one really can, that I will have healthy offspring. I don't know why I said offspring, but I said it. I won't guarantee that, like, I'll have someone healthy, like, when I have children, but at least I'll know how to take care of myself and how to take care of that next person, or how to care for and not judge, or to not shut them down. I feel like in general, it's interesting that, for example, with something like autism, that I think it's interesting that it exists where when you have neurodivergence or autism, you lose a little bit of the ability to control your feelings and your ability to control your impulses. And maybe that's some sort of deeper, I don't know if fail-safe is the right word, but basically the world created it where if there's an abundance of people who overwork themselves, if there's an abundance of people who adhere too much to social norms, that if there's an abundance of people that live by shame and and live by how to avoid shame, there will end up being people that are developed that are born that don't physically know how to respond to shame in the same way. There are people who have less of the ability to have a filter. And I don't know if that all makes sense, but for me, I sort of think it's cool that I was born to not have the best ability to sort of control my feelings. Like, I have masked them, but there will still be times where I can tell I can't contain it anymore. And I now attribute that to being neurodivergent, autism spectrum, ADHD. I can only be so conditioned and masked for so long until it gets overwhelming, or until I find ways to regulate it. But either way, it's almost like me being neurodivergent is sort of a social karmic consequence of a world that is conditioning itself too much. And I will say, like, it's really funny when I'm around people who are just kind of like, oh my god, she's not acting cool. Like, why doesn't she like stop being so excited, stop being so nice, stop being such a little goody two-shoes person, or like act cool. Why don't you swear more? Why don't you which I do kind of, but like, why don't you like pretend like you know this indie artist, or like you don't, you know, you only know mainstream things. Wow. And it's like there's so many people in the world who, like, the moment that they hear that you're not like adhering to like what you need to in order to not feel shame, they will feel like you are dangerous. Like, I cannot tell you how often, like, because I think autistic people who are neurodivergent are looked down upon because, yeah, they're not learning the same way. It's associated with like book learning and typical school learning ability and getting good grades, but there's this extra layer of not acting as socially acceptable as neurotypical people. And the thing is, I can't lie, that feels kind of karmic. That feels like the world had to balance out. It was getting too used to living by shame. And so you have these people who were born who just want to feel, or who were just born to sort of live out their feelings, to just purely be like, hey, bluntly, I don't want I don't want to take on this social conditioning, or like I don't want to act cool. I don't want to do this. Like, I would rather shut down and not interact with you by nature. My body literally doesn't want it. My body literally doesn't have like an easier time trying to adjust myself. So I just don't want to. And there's so many people that find that as like dangerous, as stupid, as something to look down upon. But to be honest, humanity, maybe that was the way the world in its yin and yang nature learned to balance out. Maybe there was too much social conditioning and there was too much breaking our backs and working too hard. And so we end up with people who need to take care of themselves more, and who, in a way, end up physically, emotionally, spiritually, holistically being more honest, if that makes sense. I don't know. Anyway, the way that this is practically happening, like, I am now starting to embrace my more, and trying to balance out more, like my more creative side. Like, I had masked my creative self and I had trouble revisiting my creativity because for so long, a lot of my creativity came from distracted, big picture, but very isolated, very like neurodivergent tendencies. And now I'm learning how to balance the fact that like I need more time to recharge, the fact that like I do get overstimulated, and that with like embracing the fact that I do think differently. I do see how things connect. I do see complex things and complex patterns, and I do have the ability to problem solve in ways that maybe other people don't. And I'm a little bit rusty on it because I've spent many years shaming myself for that. But I am finally coming back to a lot of my natural traits. And along with it, I am at least thankful for some of the social conditioning that I've had so that I could survive and be grounded at the same time. I feel like it's really important that we realize that we are a mix of, nature and nurture, obviously. But at the end of the day, if you can build enough awareness about yourself beyond just learning and like your conditioning, beyond just living your life based on what you can do to not make other people mad, if you stop living your life through shame, and if you start taking hold of and being aware of yourself, you can go beyond whatever, you can develop whatever you want. You can learn the way you want. You can become the person you want to be. We know that, but are we really living it? I don't know. Anyway, I just think that it is really interesting, especially as someone who is, I know that high functioning isn't really a term that a lot of autistic people like to use, but let's say if I am the level of autistic that is able to mask it more easily and is able to be more conditioned, then I can feel like I can use that to my advantage. I just need to stop letting myself feel the shame over it. I get to start embracing it. I get to start embracing that I have a lot of natural, also very different traits and talents. And I will slowly but surely start tapping back into those, and I will start to really appreciate myself and what I could really do. I am tired of masking my true nature, but also I'm really excited to be able to fuse that with stuff I've learned and my just general life experience now. Like, I have lived very quiet and contained. That also preserved a lot of parts of me as well, but I'm starting to integrate it. I'm starting to also heal really holistically. Everything's starting to make sense now that I've figured out all these things about me. So anyway, I'm really happy that there's more people who are talking about this, and I think I'll share more about my experience and specific things, like what it's like having a full-time job and being neurodivergent, what it's like dating and being neurodivergent, what it's like, I don't know, doing all the other things, adulting, and being neurodivergent. So yeah. All right, well, until next time, peace and love. Bye-bye.